Hello, hello. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to LMHQ. We're really excited to have you here. LMHQ is a brand new third space here in Lower Manhattan. It's created by the one and only Darius Siegel, who's over here by the kitchen, and the good folks at the Downtown Alliance. It's been open 3 weeks, and it's a place for this neighborhood to come together, for people to have conversations, much like this one. And we're here today to talk about the blockchain, and in particular, what can be done to use the blockchain for social good. So what kind of impact can people have when they use this new technology in new and creative ways? And we're really, really fortunate to have an incredible lineup joining us here today. I should probably introduce myself first. Hi, I'm John Paul Farmer. I am the Director of Technology and Civic Innovation at Microsoft. And our team is here in New York. We've been here about a year now. And we're here to work on the really hard problems, the hard social problems, and to figure out what role technology can play in helping to address them. And we're really excited to be joined by some incredible innovators and entrepreneurs, as well as our friends from the MIT Media Lab. And with us, we have not only Anne, Ryan, and Peter, who you're going to hear from later, but from the Media Lab, we've got members of the brand new Digital Currency Initiative. This is a really forward-thinking institute that's been stood up just in the last few months under Joey, IDEO, and the MIT Media Lab. And at it, we've got Chelsea and my good friend, Brian Forde. Brian and I actually worked together in Washington, D.C. at the White House. So back in 2012, we were sitting next to each other, probably about 4 feet apart from one another, for about a year and a half. And you get to know someone really well when you're working that closely with them, and under pretty intense circumstances. And I can say that Brian is not only a brilliant individual, but he's just an incredible person. And that, I think, is exemplified by what he's done in the last few decades of his life. So after joining the Peace Corps, Brian stayed in Nicaragua after his 2 years were up. And he stayed to create a new company, to create what he thought could be transformational. It was a voice over internet protocol company. And it allowed, over the course of the 7 years that he ran it with his co-founder, it allowed many people in one of the Western Hemisphere's poorest countries to reach people they couldn't reach otherwise, to communicate with their friends and family members, and to do it in a way that allowed them to afford it. It grew into the third largest telephone company in the country, behind the state telephone company and the one owned by Carlos Slim. So pretty incredible track record of success there. And after that, he went to graduate school in London. But as he's wont to do, he wasn't satisfied with just getting his degree. He started working at the White House too. So he was working at the White House while going to school in London. Not the easiest task, and he pulled it off without a hitch. And while he was at the White House, I had a chance to see him really dig in and be a leader on a lot of the data-related initiatives within the US federal government. And eventually, he got really interested in what was happening with Bitcoin and the blockchain and what these technologies could mean. And last year, Brian wrote the memo that the president read, that Barack Obama read, that taught him what was happening in this space and showed him the potential of the blockchain. And it's I think, a credit to MIT that they realized that they had the opportunity to bring on someone of Brian's caliber, and a credit to MIT and Joey and the whole team there that they realized the potential that digital currencies could have in solving so many problems. Yes, in the financial sector, but even beyond that. And that's the kind of thing that we're going to talk about here tonight. So with that, let me welcome Brian Forde to the stage to walk us through some of the basics of what's happening at MIT and what we should all know about the blockchain. Brian.
I think I need to hire John for future intros. Humbled by that. Thank you guys so much for coming out here tonight. I think we were incredibly overwhelmed by the amount of people who wanted to show up to talk about blockchain for social good. And talking to a few folks here earlier, I think what was amazing, and one of my the feedback that I really appreciate is that she didn't know anyone else here, and she didn't see that there are a lot of similarities between people here. And I think what's exciting about this is that when people think about Bitcoin, when people think about digital currency, the blockchain, they naturally think of financial institutions. They think of it as a financial currency. And what I hope in achieving tonight is actually broadening that, right? Because if you know anything about Bitcoin or the blockchain, you'll know that if you think it's just for the transfer of money, that's like thinking that the internet was just built for email. And of course, we know that there have been so many more amazing applications built off of it, more than email. And so what I want to do over the next few minutes is kind of give you Bitcoin 101. So we have a lot of people here who have kind of heard of it. There's like 4 levels of knowledge of Bitcoin that I like to describe. So the first is it's crazy. Why would you want digital monopoly money? That's a bit silly, right? The second is, wow, there's some really interesting, really smart people talking about this technology. Maybe I should start paying attention, but I still don't get it. The third is, oh, okay, I get it. This is really interesting, but I want to learn more, right? And the fourth, I affectionately call nirvana. And we'll hopefully get you from level 2 to level 3 today, so that it really kind of piques your curiosity. And I think it's best to pique people's curiosity through examples that are happening today, and that's why we have some amazing speakers here from around the country who have come here to share with you what they're working on. Because I think that's the best example. I think one of the challenges that we have with digital currency, so I was talking to a few people earlier tonight, is we don't have that hero application, right? So if I said sharing economy to you 5 years ago, you'd say, well, it's one of those things where you get to share some resource. Well, why would you want some stranger to pick you up in a car? Why would you want to rent someone's bedroom? But today you just say Airbnb and Uber, and it's a common mode of transportation, or a common form of housing today. And so, that was just 5-6 years ago, right? If you said cloud computing or cloud storage, you'd say, well, that's not for me. I'm just a person. I'm good with my USB or my email. And then you say, Dropbox comes out, and now everyone has to have it, right? And so, I think we're not there yet. And so, what's exciting today is we have some apps that are starting to get there. So I'm going to walk you through briefly just kind of Bitcoin 101. And we'll start out with the fall of 2008. You had Barack Obama, who was elected president. You had a Wall Street crash. But at that same time, something was happening that no one really noticed. And that was this white paper that was put out by Satoshi Nakamoto. And it's Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. It didn't generate a lot of interest initially, and then what they started to realize is this could be a lot more. And if you kind of look at it at face value, you're like, well, I got PayPal, I got Venmo, right? I can try and figure out how to send money to other people who use my same bank, but it's kind of hard, but whatever, this is not revolutionary. But then you notice that it's peer-to-peer. Oh, well, what does that mean? That means it's just person to person. Oh, well, that means I don't need to use a third party or an intermediary. And so, and it also solves this interesting problem of the double spend, and that's the real innovation here that I think is important. So, if you think about it, what's a double spend? Well, the beautiful thing about digital documents or photos is that you can share them. So if I take a great photo, I can text it to a few friends, I can put it on Instagram, I can put it on Facebook, can get shared around the world instantaneously, downloaded on various platforms. But that's the beauty of it, right? I just took a photo and it didn't cost me a lot of money, or any money, to share it with so many people. Dollar bills. If I text it to one friend, then I text it to a second friend, then I text it to a third friend, a fourth friend, I put it on Instagram. That doesn't mean that I could just create $4, $5, $10, $100,000. So what Bitcoin does is it eliminates the digital spend, the double spend for digital assets, which I think is a really important distinction. What does that mean? Well, now I can do what they call assets over IP. I can transfer the ownership of something digitally that I have to someone else, and you can validate that I no longer own that. Well, what's an example of that that's not money? Concert tickets, right? So if you go buy your U2 concert tonight, and thank you for not going to U2 and coming here instead, you can go onto a Craigslist and try and buy it, right? And you'll get the PDF, and you hope and pray that that person didn't send it to 5 or 10 other people. And so you kind of get there and you're kind of unsure. You put it under that scanner and it's kind of like you're like entering the ticket lottery. Did I get it? Did I buy it from a scammer or not? And so what you do with the blockchain is it actually validates that you are the actual owner. That person no longer owns it and they did not sell it to another person. And that's a really exciting distinction. Because what it is just a public ledger of debits and credits. But that can be not only for money, but it can be for assets as well. Concert tickets, homes, and we'll get into that a little later. And so what that creates is decentralized trust, or it creates trust, peer-to-peer trust. You can start to work with people, you can start to sell things, you can start to buy things without that intermediary. It's wonderful that Airbnb and Uber are out there, eBay, they're out there as these third-party brokers to establish trust, but this actually eliminates or could eliminate intermediaries, which gets really interesting because we never had that before, right? So if we think about it, the internet was built on the protocols that we use, right, is built on TCP/IP, right? So you got HTTP, you got FTP, SMTP. You can send emails, they're interoperable. You can upload and download files. You can access different web pages from around the world, right? And if you think about what the public ledger or the blockchain is doing, that's kind of that foundational technology like TCP/IP. And you can transfer money. You can transfer. You can have a reputation, you can have an identity that's authenticated, and you can have an open marketplace, right? If you think about it for a second, that's actually the eBay stack, right? It's also the Uber stack, it's the Airbnb stack. And these thoughts, you start to think, okay, well, isn't it kind of weird that I'm locked into one marketplace? That I have interoperable email, but I don't have interoperable identity or reputation. When I log onto my Uber account and then I move over to my Lyft account as a driver, my reputation doesn't follow me. And what if you could just raise your hand and say, I'm a driver. My reputation has been validated by thousands of drivers. It's been background checked by the VeriSign of background checks. And I don't care if you come from Joe's rideshare platform, Uber or Lyft, I'll give you a ride. Well, that's the kind of interoperability this can enable. And so we started the Digital Currency Initiative. I think we're maybe 12 weeks old, 13 weeks old. We're like a newborn, right? And we're looking at things like research. What's the security, the scalability, the stability of this platform? What are the privacy, the monetary, and the economic implications? Where's the social impact? And we'll hear more about that today. This is a huge opportunity for governments and elected officials to create a government that's more transparent, more efficient, and build more trust, but also for non-governmental organizations. But you'll hear about that later. And we're also going to work on inclusion, improving the diversity of the people working on Bitcoin, which we think is quite important. But we're also supporting the community. There are 5 core developers or senior developers of Bitcoin that control the Bitcoin core code. 2 out of 5 came over to MIT to have their academic independence. We just brought on one of the best writers on Bitcoin. He's the former Wall Street Journal columnist and wrote this book, Age of Cryptocurrency. I encourage you to download it and read it to kind of, and share it with others. Not because he gets royalties, but but because it's really a great book. And he just joined our team as well, because communicating about this is hard. And we think having him on board will really help us. And tonight you'll be hearing from people talking about how you can put property title on the blockchain, how that unlocks dead capital. And you'll hear about that. And that's Hernando de Soto, who actually rolled out property title of one property in Peru. He said, I've been working on change my whole life. You add the block to it, make it digital. This is pretty amazing. You'll hear about identity. Physical theft, 14 billion annual loss in the US. Identity theft, 24 billion a year. And that's because our identity starts as digital in a row in a database, in a government database, and it goes to analog. They give you a piece of paper. They say, go walk around with this to authenticate yourself, whether it's a passport or a social security number or a driver's license. And then the bank or the other institution makes a copy of it and makes it digital again. Well, in that space of digital to analog to digital, you get $24 billion of forgery or identity theft. Right? But we've been working a lot longer on protecting our physical assets, not very long on protecting our identity. Right? Or financial inclusion, which is a huge opportunity as well. If you start distributing social welfare, for example, over Bitcoin, then all of a sudden people who receive that will start to have digital wallets, and that kind of opens up the app economy because it's open, where startups and big banks can start to serve people who weren't included in the financial sector before, but they can do it affordably without the retail infrastructure. So lots of exciting things, but one exciting example that people really kind of understand is, In Ukraine, they were having these protests, and so you had a protester who started holding up his QR code, right? And it started to make the evening news. A QR code is an address of where you can send money to your wallet. Instantly, they had $15,000 because people started saying the money from around the world. You can't really do that with other platforms so instantaneously. And so we think this is like the internet is the network really of communication, where today 2.9 billion people are communicating at a greater frequency than ever before. We think this is the network of transactions, where it'll exponentially increase the amount of transactions that happen. And sometimes it's hard to explain this to audiences in the United States or the UK, because you can walk 100 feet and find an ATM, you can walk into a coffee shop, you can use your credit card. But I was in Iraq about 15 weeks ago at a tech workshop, hosted an impromptu Bitcoin workshop, thought maybe 5 people would show up. And as it turns out, more than 30 people showed up. And they immediately started downloading Bitcoin wallets and started thinking of ideas that I could never think of, because the financial institutions that they have are not as strong as ours. And so I think you'll see a lot of the best innovations coming out, not necessarily from the US or the UK or the developed worlds, but from the developing worlds. And that's going to be exciting to see. So with further ado, I'll introduce Chelsea, who is our head of social impact. And she'll start to talk a little bit more about why we're getting into this and a few of the ideas that we're working on.
Before Chelsea gets started, I realized I didn't do my most important job, which was to mention the hashtag for today. So the hashtag is blockchain for good, the number 4, and please tweet out all the wonderful things that you hear. Take it away.
Great. I'm just going to try to actually bring up my presentation really quickly. My finger is a little too fat to push the right one. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Chelsea Barabas. So I got to join Brian about 5 weeks ago. In the Digital Currency Initiative. Prior to that, I was actually a student based at MIT, and I was a researcher in a group in the Media Lab called the Center for Civic Media. So a lot of the work that we do there is really centered around this idea of how can we build digital tools and infrastructures that really serve the public interest. And as the Digital Currency Initiative started to kind of form, I got really excited about it. This has been a space I've been following for a long time. And like Brian kind of touched on in his presentation, the reason I find it so compelling is because there are such a broad set of use cases that this technology could be potentially really impactful in. That might seem odd for folks who are primarily associating digital currencies with this idea of money. Over the last year or so, there's been a new kind of strain of conversation coming up about, oh, it's not really about Bitcoin, it's about the blockchain. Are people familiar with that? Do people know what the blockchain is? I'm seeing like stillness back here. Is that like a no? Let's just call, so the blockchain is the technology kind of underlying things like Bitcoin, and it's basically the distributed public ledger that transactions are recorded on. What's important, though, for kind of the discussion about the broad set of use cases we could think about involving digital currencies is to really think about the blockchain as a means of storing files of any nature, not necessarily just transaction information. So for example, on the Bitcoin blockchain, here are some files that are currently being stored on it. You've got a tribute to Nelson Mandela, a random picture of a bald guy getting his hair done, also some more substantial stuff. So also the paper by Satoshi Nakamoto that Brian talked about earlier, as well as some interesting art and tributes to, say, for example, this famous cryptographer named Lynn Sassman. So basically any sort of PDF, document, audio file, video, those are all things that could be potentially stored on the blockchain. So that's fine, but then the next important question is, why would you want to store a file on a blockchain, right? So what are the features about a blockchain that make it particularly compelling for us to begin to think about use cases around? Some of the key things to think about is, so the blockchain is basically provides a distributed database that is maintained by thousands of computers around the world that enables you to upload and prove the existence of a file and the time that it exists according to when it was timestamped and put into basically the list or ledger of transactions that have been uploaded. Once it's been uploaded onto this blockchain, due to the distributed nature of the ledger itself, meaning it's same set of information on all of the different computers around the world. It makes it very resilient to the potential for one centralized authority or individual or company to have the access to be able to delete or manipulate the files that are on it. And due to the way that it's put onto it, you can verify that the file hasn't been changed since it's been put onto the blockchain. So what are some interesting situations where that kind of set of features, having an immutable distributed record-keeping system, basically might be useful? One we've been thinking about at DCI a little bit has been actually thinking about the blockchain as a canonical media notary. So particularly in the last few years, we've seen really the important civic potential and importance of everybody these days having a cellular phone or recording device in their pocket, right? And that's been really powerful because now we're able to, for example, like this man here based in South Carolina, we're able to record incidences with the police that can be used as substantial evidence when there are conflicting eyewitness accounts with what is actually recorded in, say, a police account when a tragedy occurs or a death occurs, right? There are several organizations right now who are really interested in kind of strengthening this kind of emerging and powerful process so that these kinds of citizen journalism artifacts or files can actually be used as substantial pieces of evidence in the courts. The key for that is actually to be able to overlay these kinds of files with specific metadata about where you were when this happened, what time it took place, and then to be able to verify that file hasn't been changed since it's actually been uploaded. This is also really important for news outlets who want to, before they broadcast out something that's been recorded by a citizen, can verify that this was in fact the original file. That's a really interesting, pretty straightforward use case that we can actually start to build and work towards already. There are some that we're thinking about that are a little bit more complicated. So particularly something like using the blockchain to distribute cash transfers or social welfare. So basically, today, the way we distribute cash from the government looks very much like it did 100 years ago. It's very much a brick and mortar kind of distribution system, and it comes along with all of the pain points that you see in those kinds of systems. So it takes a lot of time, costs a lot of money. Also, considering you're working with usually some more marginalized communities in receiving this money, they're also more vulnerable to rent-seeking behavior. And it's very difficult to track and audit the transactions that are put on it. So it's only retroactively that you can see, oh man, we're losing a lot of money in this leaky pipeline, but we can't really trace it back and figure out how. So we're in conversation with some people who are really interested in thinking about, okay, could we use the blockchain as a foundation for a digital payments infrastructure that would be much more efficient, cost less money also for the recipient in terms of travel costs, things like that, by being able to receive that money in a secure and highly verifiable way on their mobile phones. In addition to that, it's also would provide a foundation for much more open and accessible audits to take place on where that money is going and how the government is actually handling that process. But like I said, it's not exactly super clean cut. There are a lot of really interesting questions that need to be answered before we would be able to see kind of a blockchain-based social welfare system put into place. Some of them have to do with the scalability of such systems. Some people argue, why would you use the blockchain for this when you could use an awesome digital cash system like M-Pesa, which is a more centralized version of being able to do digital transactions. Now, some of the things I was talking about earlier, there are clearly great features that the blockchain provides that what we really need to see is investigate what kinds of services to enable auditing to happen more efficiently and effectively. What kinds of services can you provide to make the blockchain and digital currencies more usable for your everyday user? These kinds of questions are really the types of things that you'd have to answer in order for this to actually go from a PowerPoint presentation to being reality. But like Brian said, we think that's actually something that we can do within the fairly near term. And it's actually what we think is actually our unique kind of role to be able to play in this space. So not only do we have, an awesome amount of great minds at MIT who are really getting interested in this space, but we've also started to form some really interesting partnerships with other startups and thinkers in the space who are doing some really interesting stuff, who've come to us, shown us, the groundbreaking work that they're doing, but they're not able to find those strategic partnerships with people who have in-depth, expertise and domain experience implementing and delivering services to the public that they're looking for. At the same time, we've got governments coming to us being like, hey, we're really interested in being proactive about understanding this technology and using it to improve our ability to serve the public. So us at MIT, we're seeing our role as really being able to fill that gap, bring together the community at MIT with our with partners like some of the guys you're going to see tonight, alongside governments and other public sector folks to actually do some substantial pilots over the next couple of years to dig into some of these tough questions that we think need to be answered in order for this to go from speculation to reality within the fairly near term. So, two big kind of spheres of operation we're kind of working in right now. One is, like I was saying, this collaboration aspect, really trying to foster holistic development of the technology, not only just the technology piece, but that domain expertise from government, public servants, sociologists, things like that, but also provide a forum for those critical conversations to take place. So any really provocative and interesting technology can be used for good as it could be used for not good, right? So we're really interested in thinking through very thoughtful implementation in the future and how our good intentions can turn into good reality. So that's what we'll be working on over the next, who knows how long, for a while. We've been working on it for 12 weeks. I'm going to try to keep it short. We've got more substantial examples coming your way now. So I hope that's a good overview for you, and we can talk afterwards. Now we're bringing Peter up. Great, thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Chelsea. That was fantastic. It kind of brings a lot more color to the discussion, and I think that tees it up perfectly for. So a lot of people think, Bitcoin is science fiction. Right? And then I'm reading in the news that the Honduran government is looking to put property title on the blockchain. And you realize, wow, this is coming at us a lot quicker than you think. More than $800 million has been invested into digital currency-related startups over the last several years. And from what we hear, it'll reach $1 billion by the end of the year. And this technology has only been around for 6 years. And so I'm excited to bring out Peter, who's kind of bringing us to the future faster.
Hey, fantastic. What a pleasure it is to be in New York City. Thanks, everybody, for coming out on a Monday night to learn about a new technology. It's very humbling to follow two people from MIT and two people who worked at the White House, and especially one who did both. So what an incredible group tonight. Thank you. My name is Peter Kirby. I am the CEO of Factom. I'm going to talk about a project that we're working on that I think has some interesting social impacts. And there we go. Perfect. So I always start, so we all have our metaphors for how blockchains work, and this is my favorite one. Imagine I send money to Brian, and we write it on a transaction as a brick. Write it on a brick, then we stack 10,000 bricks on top of that. And we move on when Brian sends money to Chelsea, then we stack another 10,000 bricks on top of that. And what that gives us is this idea of immutable ledgers. It's really, really hard to chase that first transaction if you've got all these bricks on top of it. That's how proof of work works, and this is what blockchains really let us do. These concepts of immutable record keeping, write it once, never unwrite it. Transparency, privacy balance, right? And globally distributed index. It's owned by all of us and none of us, just like the internet is. So that's sort of at the core of what blockchains do. And to build on what both Brian and Chelsea talked about, money is the first application of this technology. I'm going to talk about another project that we're working on that's really near and dear to my heart because it has a lot of social impact. This is a land title record in Honduras. All of the wealth of this country is basically secured by this kind of thing. Old, dusty records in books. For a while, they would just handwrite them in. Then eventually they moved to this system where they put them in binders, right? So, you just collect the titles and you put them into binders. This wonderful library got a lock put on the door 2 days before I showed up. So it's kind of a big deal. Because what happened was, they digitized all these title records, right? The World Bank spent a lot of money to do this. They put it in one great big title record database. And then as soon as they did that, some bureaucrats got in and started giving themselves beachfront property, right? This really happened, and it's a total tragedy because if all the wealth is in land and the land record is a mess, what do you do about it? Huge scandal. It took down the administration. The new administration came in and said, project number one is to fix this land title. So this is this concept of tamper-proof land title records. We use Factom, but it's basically a blockchain technology that allows us to write these records into an immutable ledger and basically create an immutable title record, right? And so it's pretty simple. Just to talk a little bit about how the tech works, this is a really good metaphor for how all this tech is going to work. You've got an application that's just plain old vanilla cloud architecture. It's funny to say that, but here we are 10 years later since the Dropbox evolution. And we can just build these applications on Amazon Web Services Stack or Google Stack or something. And then what it does is it writes hashes into the blockchain. So you've always got an external way to audit that those records haven't been changed. So imagine, you just hash every single title record. Now you've got an immutable title record. We've got a really big problem though, and we call it the garbage in problem. Every record keeping system in the world has garbage in equals garbage out. So you need to think about the proof of process also. So when the attorney, the notary, signs off on that document, we put that in the blockchain. And the person who reviews the legal description, we put that in the blockchain. The person who verifies it and verifies it again, all those steps go in the blockchain. So we also start seeing what happened to that document before it became a title record. That way, if it turns out that that attorney submits something fraudulent, you can go back and look at everything they ever did, right? So this is a system where basically people start feeling watched. All of these social problems are going to be solved by a little bit of technology and a whole lot of social political engineering. And this is a really good way to do it. What's the expression? Sunlight is the best disinfectant. When we know what's going on, it starts changing behaviors, right? So the way we do this is Factom is just a data layer that sits on top of the blockchain. It lets us basically do chains and chains of chains. I put this slide up here because we know right now Bitcoin is 98, 99% of the horsepower in the world. There's like 500 petahash worth of mining power. But imagine you can take those anchors from Factom and put them in Ripple and Ethereum and write them in the classifieds of the New York Times, right? So you start building truly immutable blockchain technology based on all of the blockchains that will exist and start stacking them together. So we're tying all this immutability together. It's a belts and suspenders and suspenders and suspenders strategy. So what and who cares? Why does this matter? In Honduras and throughout Central America, a mortgage costs you 18% interest on a 10-year loan, which is basically like a credit card on your house. Expensive mortgages, okay, so what? But what that means is in the US, basically all of the investment dollars come from people borrowing against assets. You borrow against businesses, you borrow against houses, and that's where we basically get the money that really does create the economy here. So if you can do that, if you can get a better property record secured by better collateral, you can start getting more money for these business investments, the property improvements, the commercial projects, right? And right now, throughout Central America and throughout the developing world, you can't do that because frankly, you can't trust the title. Would I lend you money if I knew that some bureaucrat could steal your property in an instant? So big shift in the way these economies can think about securing collateral, borrowing against it, doing real contracts, doing mining rights, all these kind of instruments that we take for granted in the developed world, you can start doing with this, this idea that you make an immutable title record. I'm going to leave you on this slide because I think DeSoto is totally brilliant, but he called it the $9 trillion in dead capital. All of these pieces of land that are either not recorded at all or recorded in very basically crappy systems. If you could unlock that, then basically this is the path towards economic development throughout the developing world. So blockchain technology makes all this possible in a way that has never existed before. We're just we're happy to play our own small part in this, but every single one of you can go home and think about a problem where you've got records and somebody who has the ability to change them and monkey with them. And that makes, as we talked about, identity is a big deal there. Certainly all the collateral in the world, and a tremendous number of problems that we're not even smart enough to think about. So go off there and create your own blockchain applications.
That was fantastic. I learned a ton, actually. I really appreciated that. How do I... Our next speaker is Ann Kim, who comes to us from IDEO, and they've been doing this amazing summer workshop with 5 or 6 different teams throughout the summer with college students who have been identifying all of these different prototypes. We get a lot of blog posts about what you could do. What's exciting about them is they're actually trying it out and seeing what works and what doesn't. So we're thrilled to have her here talk about what I thought was one of the most exciting projects when I saw the presentation last week. So Ann Kim.
Hi, everybody. So I am one of the public sector portfolio leads at IDEO. I'm from the Cambridge office, and this summer also happened to be a guide for the exact program that Brian just mentioned. I'm here to talk about actually one of the projects, one of the teams working on sort of their efforts around civic engagement. Oops. So just really quickly, the Bits and Blocks Lab is a thematic incubator. We're looking at trust transactions and participation, looking at what's opened up because of this blockchain technology. What we're really trying to do is bring a human-centered lens to it. So we know the technology is there, but instead of trying to wedge the technology into a space, we want to understand what it is that people are actually looking for. Where are the gaps? What are the human problems that we need to solve? And the overlay of the human, the business, and the technical is actually where the innovation really happens. This is just a really quick view of the Bits and Blocks Lab. So we have 6 teams. We have 25 student design entrepreneurs, and this is sort of what it looks like on a daily basis. What's not here is actually, because of confidentiality issues, is them going out into the field and sort of doing interviews and actually talking to people, spending time in their homes, learning about identity theft, learning about transfer of titles, learning about how they do or don't engage with civic life. At the beginning of the lab, we sort of set it up with these emerging themes. One, looking at peer-to-peer exchange that blockchain makes possible. Frictionless transactions, sharing ownership and coordinating that ownership, digital scarcity, what happens when you have only sort of one copy of something, and of course trust and authenticity. The team I'm looking at today was focused actually on frictionless transactions, and I'm curious to hear your responses to sort of where they've ended up. They were really interested in thinking about how do we make it easier to give, because there's a gap between people wanting to give, having a sense of where the money actually goes. There are ways in which that's not set up to be done easily. So they had actually gone out into the field with a few different prototypes. One was actually a sort of a donation tug of war. What if you sort of made this into a kind of game where people were both sides were giving to something good, but you actually had this sort of digital experience where you were by donating money actually contributing to a tug of war. Or would, for instance, like donating 25 cents to see some kind of hilarious photo, would that actually trigger a way for people to give? And by the way, I'm not going to charge you 25 cents to see this, but this was the dragon cat prototype that they showed. One of the learnings, though, was really around how do you build context around this. So, for instance, on the left side here, you might see an everyday sort of action that you could potentially piggyback on. And so here it's using clean water to be able to do laundry. Is there a way that could that actually trigger sort of a microtransaction? Thinking about donating for clean water in another part of the world, or in this case, looking at context. So reading a news article and having the ability to sort of send micro amounts towards that particular effort. So sort of getting their head wrapped in the space of giving. Another sort of interesting area they looked at was actually self-sustaining systems. So in this case, they were all sort of bicycle enthusiasts and thinking about how can we actually engage people in cycling. With cycling through microtransactions. So in this particular case, they created a prototype where actually they gave the bike its own address. So could this actually be a sort of self-sustaining system? So people could actually donate to the bike could earn Bitcoin to actually maintain a budget to upgrade itself, perhaps pay taxes, thinking about people just sort of supporting bike transportation and actually giving money through its public address. And just as a side note, this is sort of what the prototype path looks like. A lot of what we emphasize is actually going out, coming up with a question, creating a prototype, and gathering evidence around that. And so in this case, this is sort of how they were learning through that kind of iteration. In this 8-week program, in the last few weeks, where they've ended up actually thinking about civic infrastructure. And so in Boston, potholes, unsurprisingly, are a very big problem. And it got them actually thinking, well, how do we actually create ways for people to engage with civic infrastructure? How, for instance, in front of this building, could we create a mechanism by which people could actually create momentum around building a bus shelter? A few things from their own research insights around the gap between identifying a problem and actually figuring out a pathway to actually go about creating a solution for it. What they found oftentimes was that there was that sort of one community champion who would be the one sort of out there for the cause, raising money, working with the local government to make it happen. How do we actually address this gap? And on the city side, they actually found that cities often don't have enough data about what citizens actually want. So they will, as the team told it, hire consultants to go out and sort of talk to their constituents and sort of report back what people are looking for, or relying on older style sort of town hall meetings to gather this kind of data. So they really saw this as an opportunity, and we like to articulate opportunities as how might we questions. How might we give citizens a way to identify community needs, and how might we enable cities to access and leverage that very data? How do we give that champion the tools and create the momentum around a cause? And how might we actually match existing government funds with needs identified by citizens? And actually, how do we also design for just greater transparency around this? So I'm just going to show you a couple touch points. We're still sort of in the midst of the program, so this is not a fully baked venture, but I think it'd be really interesting just to see sort of where they've ended up. One of them is actually bridging the physical and digital, and they called this the dandelion prototype. And what they actually did was they went out and they identified a park where they thought there could actually be a new playground structure. And so they planted what they called the dandelion. And so the idea was you would go and you would sort of pluck one. They wanted to see whether or not that could actually then push people into sort of a digital interaction. So for instance, if this playground could have its own address, people very, very much on the spot, rather than going home, logging in somewhere and then donating money, they could actually just give this new effort money. As you start designing this, you can also think about new digital interactions. So for instance, instead of having something that's paper-based, maybe it's actually digital. And so when I actually contribute a small amount of money to it, that the image of this new playground actually starts filling in, and I can see the very block, sort of going back to the brick metaphor, see that visualization, get me much more invested and more closely connected to the very thing that we're trying to build. Another kind of touch point here is how do we actually build for democratizing decision making and scaling with the blockchain? So our lab is based in Cambridge, and so one of the ideas or prototypes that they're working with right now is this idea of a Cambridge coin. So let's say, for instance, every citizen was given X number of coins at the beginning of a year. And over time, different, you might end up with, 10, 20, 30 different projects around the city, and that citizens are actually given the ability to vote or to donate towards that particular cause. So right there, you start collecting all this data, and human beings actually become sort of sensors for the city. You start getting a real-time pulse of what it is that people care about. So going forward for us, some of the learnings from this is, because this is as much a sort of venture incubation lab as it is sort of a learning lab. One is just enabling frictionless exchange. So how do we make this easier for people, right? Dynamic participation, that there are ways for people to pull people in, and rather than going somewhere, going to a website, finding out about it in sort of these sort of fringe ways, how do we actually create something where it's much more dynamic, much more visible, much more integrated into the actual landscape that we live in? And finally, mechanisms for accountability. So not only are we giving citizens, in this sort of prototype, the power to vote or sort of directly give money to a cause, but we're also thinking about using the blockchain technology to actually create better windows into government accountability, right? So if you do vote for the bus shelter, how do I, throughout the process, maybe it'll take 6 months, 8 months, how do I actually stay engaged using this technology and see that sort of momentum build? And also going forward, just lots more prototyping and enthusiasm. This is actually David from Team Strand, who's been working on some of this sort of civic infrastructure prototyping. And I love this photo because it's just them going out and making things and having people really respond to it. And through that sort of iterative process, figuring out how we actually can leverage blockchain in our civic lives. So I encourage you to, we actually have a couple Medium posts around the summer experience. So if you're curious about how we're approaching this, I would definitely encourage you to go read that. Thank you.
That was fantastic. I just love the idea of it. It's kind of like see, click, fix meets participatory budgeting, right? Like, what if you could have like a $500 cap on your tax dollars, and you could just contribute $10 to your park, $5 to your street light, $50 to your firehouse in your neighborhood, and you can kind of start to allocate some of the dollars that you get, and then you get a tax rebate at the end of the year, or something like that. I don't know. But I know that IDEO is really kind of coming up with some really creative ideas, and we're excited they're here to share them with you. And our last speaker.
I don't know what's going on with it.
Cool. Our last speaker will be presenting shortly. His name is Ryan Shea, and he started Onename.io. And I think what's exciting about Onename is it starts to put identity onto the blockchain, which I think is really critical. If you think about a lot of transactions, they don't work without identity, and so we're really excited to hear him speak while we get his laptop, which is right here,
See if that works.
and see if it works here.
I guess we can do that.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, Ryan.
Cool. All right. Hi, everyone. So my name is Ryan. I'm the co-founder of Onename, and I'm here to talk about identification on the blockchain. So the identity problem. So there's billions of people around the world who do not have access to government-issued ID documents. And so this includes a lot of people in the United States, including 25% of African Americans, hundreds of millions in India. It includes refugees around the world. It includes homeless people. There's just plenty of people who do not have access to government-issued identification. Their IDs are required, as we know, to do a lot of things in our daily lives. This includes opening a bank account, getting housing, receiving government benefits, voting in elections, and even avoiding arrests and minor offenses. Sometimes you can get arrested for something that you could have otherwise avoided if you just had valid identification. So a lot of the identification that we have in the United States today is identification theater. So we get a government identity that starts out in the database of some government organization. It gets printed out, it gets issued to us in a physical form as a social security card, as a driver's license, as a passport. And then we use that identification document to go to a bank and open an account, or go to some other location. And somewhere along the way, there's a lot of problems, a lot of things that could possibly go wrong. And those things that go wrong translate into approximately $25 billion lost every year due to identity theft. That's because we don't have a very good way of authenticating who you are, and we rely on these physical documents, and we rely on personally identifiable information to identify ourselves. I don't know if you guys have answered those security questions online that try to basically identify who you are. If you've ever been asked a question online that's like, what is your mother's maiden name? Those are the kind of things that we're often asked online to identify ourselves, and simply they're just not secure, because if someone is able to get that information about you, they are able to be you on the internet. We need a much better way, and the blockchain might have our answers, the answers to our identity problems. So identification and the blockchain. So you can think of the blockchain as a document notary. So with Bitcoin and a little bit of cryptography, which is basically mathematics, we can make a proof that a certain statement was made by a certain person at a certain time. And once we have that, we can actually allow people to issue themselves ID documents, which is very different from a government issuing you an identity document. You can take an action, and you can prove to the world that you did it at a certain time. You can fill out a form, and you can present it to the world and say, hey, this is actually me. These self-issued IDs, they can live on your mobile device, and they can live as a physical ID card that you're able to print out. So the cool thing here is that once you have this self-issued ID, you take the self-issued ID, and then you have a government validate it. Then you now have an identification that is as strong as a government-issued ID. And you can also have that self-issued ID be validated by other organizations, corporations, even your friends. And you can have an ID that can act as much more than just a government ID, as a university ID, as your ID for work, and so on. So once you have that, once you have this self-issued ID, you can tie a username to it. And this username serves a purpose of making it be very convenient to use. So if, for example, you didn't have your phone with you, if you didn't have your physical ID card with you, but you just had your face and you could tell someone your username, this is a very convenient way to actually identify yourself. And now we get into actually the details of how this works. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of background, which I might actually skip through. Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to skip through that section, and I'm going to go to generating a digital blockchain ID. So how we actually do this in steps. So the first thing that we do is we download a mobile app or a desktop app, and then we allow you to generate a key that acts as your pseudonymous identity. So this is basically, think of it like this is the device that you're using. You say, I am this device, but no one knows who you are. And then step two, you fill out a form with your information. You have that form be digitally signed, so digital signatures. They're very similar to signatures in real life. When you sign a document, someone can look at that document, they can say, oh, okay, this signature matches the signature of the person that I know, and you can verify that it was in fact created by the same person. But digital signatures are actually a much more secure way of doing this. So once we digitally sign that document, we have validated it. And then you can also do username registration on the blockchain, and you link a given username to this identity document, and now the identity document will have a identifier that is you. So anytime you can provide your username to someone, it can be a proxy for the document itself, and they can go and look up that document. And then after that, you can actually hold up a photo. Hold up a sign that says that this is my blockchain ID, and you can take a picture of yourself holding up that sign, and then post it online. And there's a two-way link between yourself and like actually your face and the identity document. So that anytime someone sees your face, someone sees you in an in-person context, they'll be able to know that you were in fact that person on that identity document, which might be available online. So now you have a self-issued blockchain ID. You have issued it to yourself, and the world can see that this was in fact issued by you. And after that, you can do a bunch of cool things. So you can have that ID document be validated by a university, and now the self-issued ID is also a university ID. If you have this document signed by a local DMV, now it can act as your driver's license as well. And if you have this document signed by the Social Security Administration, then it can act as your Social Security number card as well. So you have this single document that you have issued to yourself that through a few simple steps could turn into your identification in every context of your life. And all you need to do is have it on one of your devices, on your mobile device, on your laptop, or even on a printed out card. And so at Onename we do basically something very similar to what we just described. I just described it in kind of an abstract form. But what we do is we create exactly these self-issued ID documents on the blockchain. We give our users software so that they can use these documents to log into websites and applications. And these websites and applications can be websites like the Social Security Administration's website, for example. They can be your bank. They can be even Facebook or Google or Microsoft, or it could be any website that you can think of, or any mobile app, right? And then in the future, we'll work with we're going to work with government institutions. We're going to work with businesses and get as many organizations as we can to validate these self-issued IDs. And as the more institutions that are validating these IDs, the more globally accepted they can become. So that's it. And thank you guys very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ryan. So what we wanted to use the last 10 minutes for is just Q&A. So we'll just kind of bring up the speakers, and if you guys have questions, we'd love to hear them or be able to answer them. So feel free to just kind of raise your hand, and I can call on you, and we can kind of get this started. Sure. What is your name and? Oh, cool. Just your name and organization? That'd be great.
Thank you very much for all the really inspiring presentations. Fantastic. One overarching theme that I noticed, though, is a lot of public sector problems that you guys are addressing. And it's obviously no secret that public sector is inefficient in a lot of ways, but at the same time, they're a huge employer. A lot of people working in all these processes, so it's really going to cut down a lot of these inefficiencies. Like, so I was wondering, from your experience, where they've done any analysis of the economic ramifications if this was adopted at a large scale in the sector.
They're all looking at me to answer that. I think it's a really interesting question. We haven't done it, but there's a great book by a couple of MIT professors, The Second Machine Age, that talks about this as well. I'm not sure if they did an analysis on the impact to the public sector, but I do think that if this does replace jobs that people have done before, that frees them up to do things that are more interesting, like the jobs that this is replacing maybe aren't the most interesting, and so they can actually be doing things. That doesn't mean that they'll necessarily lose their jobs. They could be working on a lot of other things as well that require more humans. Yep, in the back.
My name is Matt Harrigan. I run an organization called Grants and Tech. My question is with regard to you're doing all of you. You're doing really awesome experimentation with social uses for blockchain, for voting systems, for discretionary spending of your tax. We also have, not to get too political, we have a wing of the government that doesn't believe in climate change or evolution. So literally, I'm curious to know how you're going to encourage a voting system where I pull a lever like this behind a curtain to actually adopt some of these applications that you're talking about, because that the applications could work doesn't seem in doubt, but that we have a political system that will actually test some of these does.
Peter, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. Well, you missed in the presentation where blockchains fix climate change. I thought I said that. Maybe I forgot. Okay, so yeah, step 1 is build the tech. Step 2 through 10 is get the political, social environment to make the tech sort of fit into the way into the world. And obviously that's the huge challenge. In the situation of voting, in the situation of land titles, in the situation of like a lot of these sort of governance tasks, the way we think about it is small, cheap experiments. So, in Central America, we're running it in one relatively small city, and that will teach us how to do it broader, right? And when you can do a small, cheap experiment and demonstrate its value, then you have a path for both people and legislators to sort of latch onto. Oh, I see, that was better, faster, cheaper. Can we do it in this next city? And then can we do it across a country? And then can we do it across a region? So that's how we have to think about this as incremental change. Voting, it's not going to be a US election that's put on the blockchain first. It's going to be like a small municipal election. And that's the kind of thing that allows regulators to feel more comfortable with it, politicians to feel more comfortable with it, people to feel more comfortable with it. And I think that's a really good policy for social change in general. So, that's how we're approaching it, and I think when you guys are all thinking about your own social problems, that's a really good way. The question is, what's the small, cheap experiment here?
Over here?
Yeah, so when you guys talk about the blockchain, I feel like sometimes you're talking about the Bitcoin blockchain, other times you're talking about blockchains that maybe you're creating yourselves or using other networks. So could you, if you guys are, can you just kind of go around and say like what blockchains, like are you using the Bitcoin blockchain for your products? And if not, like what blockchain are you using and why?
Sure. So right now we are using the Namecoin blockchain, and we are also investigating working on top of the Bitcoin blockchain. So our technology is blockchain agnostic. It could work on any blockchain, but ultimately our goal is to be on the Bitcoin blockchain.
We'll go around real quick. There's a weird echo. So Factom is a data layer on top of Bitcoin. I put up that slide there with the multiple blockchains. What we do in Factom is every 10 minutes we do every 10 minutes we do a merge. So hash to hash to hash to hash, so they get to a single one, and we anchor that in Bitcoin. I can take that same anchor and put it in Ethereum and Ripple and Litecoin and the New York Times, right? So Brian put a slide up there that I think is really essential that everybody like internalizes. Just like we built the internet as a stack of technologies with TCP/IP on the bottom, and HTTP and file transfer protocol, etc. on top, and then you build more sophisticated stuff on top of that, like Flash. That's how we're going to build blockchain technologies. Bitcoin right now produces like an incredible bedrock. So a lot of these things are being built on top of Bitcoin, but Bitcoin has some major limitations. Brian brought up that the block size argument. So there's a capacity problem, there's a speed problem, there's a cost problem. So that's why people who are building on top of Bitcoin or on top of blockchain technologies in general have to look at different pieces of the tech, because Bitcoin can't really do all the things we want to do yet.
And for our teams, they're just at a very early prototyping stage for that particular team. They were using Bitcoin.
Hi, I'm Benjamin Dean. I'm a fellow at Columbia University on technology and public policy. I just wanted to build a bit on the comment from the back there, because I think that his point is not so much, can we solve everything with the blockchain? But we can't ignore the structural and institutional dynamics that are there. And I guess my question for you guys is, there's potential to gain the blockchain, because in the end, they're inputs that can be manipulated. When we think about, I think it was your example, person X in situation Y at time T, those can still be manipulated by the users of the blockchain. So I just wonder if you think about, is there any way around that, or is that just kind of the dual use problem that we run into all the time with technology, and it's just inevitable?
So actually, with the blockchain, once you perform a write to it, once you put data in the blockchain, that data cannot be changed.
Yes, but when you put it in, you can manipulate when you put it in, or who puts it in, or
what do you mean by if a certain person put it in at a certain time, then that cannot be undone, right?
Yes, that's true.
Okay.
But I guess there are elements that are able to influence when it's put in and who puts it in.
You're talking about the problem I brought up, garbage in equals garbage out,
yeah,
right?
The DIGO problem.
Yeah, and so this is really useful when we're talking about bill records, because if you put it in incorrectly, it's wrong. So you always need to build some combination of technology solutions and social solutions, right? And as a nascent industry, we need to think about how those things get balanced. So I showed the proof of process thing where we like have the notary sign something digitally, and that goes in the blockchain, right? So then you've got a social impact, like if that person submits a fraudulent document, then you can go look at everything they did. They also have this sense they're not just being watched now, but being watched into the future. So that's a real social pressure to do things correctly. The other thing is you can build legal structures around that. If that person submits a fraudulent record, it has X amount of jail time attached. And we've got a digital proof of that, which is very different. Because to Brian's point, it's in there, you can't get it out of there, right? So if you agree to a fraudulent document and you submit it and you sign it and you can prove that you signed it, because you did maybe some sort of bio-authentication or something, like that's a powerful, powerful way to solve the garbage in, garbage out problem. So blockchains don't fix social problems, but blockchains give us some tools to sort of track what's going on so that you can build more constructs on top of that.
Yep.
David Solomon, New York Internet Society. We discussed here identity and authentication and authorization, that type of thing. How can blockchain facilitate privacy and online anonymity? Could you repeat the question? Sure.
Privacy and what was the second half? Anonymity. Oh yeah. You want to take that?
So we're working on a authentication protocol so that users can log into websites without having to use a third party. And so today users will log in with either a username and password or with some third party, like Facebook, like Google, like Microsoft, Amazon, Twitter, any company you can think of. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of individuals who would like to log in a way that is just as privacy conscious as username and password, but is as convenient as logging in with any of these third parties. So we are providing a solution where you can log in without any third party, where you could be your own identity provider. And so when you do that, you can also be anonymous when you log in and kind of bring whatever level of information that you'd like with you. So with a combination of cryptography and the blockchain, you can actually have authentication that really respects users' privacy.
And so it's like when you log into a site with Facebook, and then all of a sudden you go back to Facebook and you see those ads from that site. You're like, I would prefer a little more privacy there. That's the kind of thing that Onename can enable. I think the other thing to think about is good government, bad government, right? So good government wants to protect against bad actors who commit money laundering. Bad government wants to know who are you transferring money to, so they know who you associate with and who they also should interrogate or persecute, right? So there's like a double-edged coin on private, double-edged coin. Does that make sense?
I think you just made up a new phrase.
On the privacy issue, right? It can be powerful to protect people against bad governments, and then not helpful when good governments are trying to ferret out criminals. So it's a really interesting question that you bring up, and the exciting thing about blockchain is it can help address some of those nuances, and would love to continue that conversation with you. I think we're out of time. If my timekeeper says, is that right, John? We're out of time.
That's probably right.
We're out of time, but we will be here. I don't know what time they're closing us out, and I think it's sooner rather than later. But I'll yield the stage to John here.
So with that, please join me in thanking all of our amazing speakers. We've got an incredible group of people here, we really do, and I want to encourage everyone to talk to the speakers, but also to one another. We've got some food and drinks left over. You can go grab those, I think, before they all get thrown out, and before we get thrown out of the building. But thank you for being here today, and I want to say one last thing, which is that we've heard all these amazing ways that we can use blockchain to address everything from voting to land titles, a lot of things that really matter. They matter because they help real people, and there are a lot of people who need help. There's one person in particular I'm going to mention named Fege Meyer. Fege was a young civic hacker here in New York. A lot of people in this room might know her or have known her. She passed away last week, and she needed help and didn't get it. And I want to encourage everyone in this room to give help to anyone you think might need it. And if you ever do need help yourself, ask. Please ask. Because at the end of the day, things don't happen on their own. It takes all of us to do them. And I think this conversation here is a great example. Because we talk about how might we, and talk about how might we. Please leave this room tonight thinking about how might you. How might you come up with new, creative, innovative ways to use these technologies or other technologies to help people. Because that's what it's all about. So thank you for being here tonight. Thank you so much for doing this conversation. And please stay around, hang out, enjoy some food and drinks, and meet some great people. Thank you.
And thank you, John and Microsoft.